It is 1258. The army marching south has never lost a battle. Not once. Not in 60 years. They destroyed Baghdad, they erased Kiev, they made all of Europe tremble.
Historians didn't call them an enemy. You know, because you can fight an enemy. You can negotiate with an enemy. This was something else entirely.
You can't defeat a hurricane, right? You can't outthink an earthquake. And in the same way, you could not stop the Mongol army. It was basically considered a law of nature. And a small kingdom of 5 million people, with no allies, no comparable technology, and absolutely no realistic chance of survival, decided to fight back.
They won 3 times. And the man who made that possible may be the greatest military commander in human history. And you have almost certainly never heard of him.
Okay, so let's really get into this. To understand just how huge this victory was, you first have to understand the sheer impossibility of it. And that means you have to understand the enemy they were up against. I mean, the scale here is just, it's mind-boggling. At its peak, the Mongol Empire controlled 24 million square kilometers. To put that into perspective for you, that's 4 times the size of the Roman Empire at its absolute height. It stretched from the Pacific Ocean all the way to the heart of Europe. And this chart really drives that home, doesn't it? Look at how the Mongol Empire just dwarfs even the mighty Roman and British empires. But it wasn't just about land. They controlled over 100 million people. And get this, before they reached the borders of Daothe, they had not suffered a single major battlefield defeat in 60 years. For all intents and purposes, they were a perfect military force. So how'd they do it? Well, it was a terrifyingly efficient system. First, their mobility was something no one could touch. Every warrior had multiple horses, letting them cover 150 kilometers a day. They could just appear out of nowhere before armies could even get organized. Second, they had superior intelligence. Their massive spy networks meant they knew everything, the terrain, the politics, the weaknesses of their enemy, before a single soldier ever crossed the border. And third, they had perfected a psychological weapon, the feigned retreat. They'd lure entire armies into a chase, only to turn, surround, and completely annihilate them. It was a near-perfect system of conquest.
So here is the question that should be keeping military historians up at night. Every advantage was on the Mongol side. The numbers, the technology, the experience, the logistics. And yet, they lost 3 times to the same man. Either Tran Dao was doing something that no one else in history had figured out yet, or we are missing something fundamental about how wars are actually won. All right, let's get to the battles themselves. We're going to walk through the 3 invasions. And this is where the central debate really heats up. Was this the work of one brilliant man who outfought an apocalypse? Or was it just a case of an unstoppable army finding itself in the wrong place at the wrong time? The first invasion, led by one of the Mongols' top generals. 40,000 elite cavalry just pour in. Now, a purely analytical military historian, let's call this the host A view, would look at this and say the case is closed. The Mongols got hammered by the tropical heat, disease, a lack of food for their horses. They were a steppe army fighting in a jungle. The environment defeated them. But that feels too simple, right? This is the host B argument. You have to ask why the environment became a weapon. Because Tran Dao, even as a young commander, used a scorched earth strategy. He had the capital abandoned, all the food supplies destroyed. He didn't just let the environment do the work, he forced the Mongols into a trap where the environment could do the work. That's not geography, that's strategy. Now, the first invasion you could explain away as bad luck, wrong climate, wrong terrain, unfortunate timing. But Kublai Khan did not accept excuses. He sent his own son next time, with 300,000 soldiers, the largest Mongol force ever deployed in Southeast Asia. And Tran Dao looked at that number and made a decision that every general in his court thought was insane.
The court was in total chaos. The king himself was actually thinking about surrendering. And in that moment of absolute crisis, when asked his opinion, Tran Dao simply said, "Bệ hạ muốn hàng, xin hãy chém đầu thần trước đã." If your majesty wishes to surrender, please behead me first. Just let that sink in. That is the absolute refusal to lose, right there, in one sentence.
And this slide right here perfectly illustrates that core debate. On one side, you have the argument that the Mongols failed because of the environment. The tropical diseases, the monsoon rains, the dense jungle, these are unbeatable factors. But the other side argues that those factors only became decisive because of the strategy.
a deliberate plan of strategic retreat, scorched earth, and constant guerrilla harassment. You see, every other army had faced that same environment and lost. The only variable that changed was the commander's strategy to weaponize it. I want to stop here because this is the moment that separates Chen Hongdao from almost every other commander in history. He gave up the capital, again, voluntarily, with the enemy at the gates. And he was right. Not by accident, not by luck. He had calculated exactly how long it would take for a 300,000-man army to collapse from disease and broken supply lines in tropical heat. He was running a clock that his enemy didn't know existed. And when that clock ran out, he struck, and the result was this. In May of 1285, this southern Mongol army was crushed, and their general, Sogedo, was killed. This had never happened before. I mean, never. Senior Mongol commanders simply did not die in battle. This was a massive psychological blow. It proved the apocalypse could bleed. The third invasion is where this story becomes something else entirely. Because Kublai Khan had learned from his mistakes. He solved the supply problem. He built a fleet. He thought he had finally found the answer. And Chen Hongdao let him believe that, right up until the tide went out. I mean, this is pure tactical genius. It's like something from a movie. He had his men plant massive iron-tipped wooden stakes in the riverbed, totally invisible at high tide. Then he set a small force to bait the entire Mongol fleet into the river, and then he just waited. As the tide started to recede, the water level dropped, and these stakes emerged from the water. You can just imagine the sound, the sickening crunch of timber as hundreds of massive warships were suddenly impaled from below, cracking and splintering. The entire fleet was trapped, destroyed, and their commander was captured. Just like that, the supply line was gone. The invasion was over. So, the really crucial question is, how did he do this? This wasn't just a clever trick with the tides. This was a completely new way of thinking about war itself. He perfected a concept that wouldn't even have a name for another 700 years, People's War. The idea is simple, but for the 13th century, it was absolutely revolutionary. If your army can't win a conventional battle, then you don't fight a conventional battle. You make the entire country your army. Every citizen becomes a soldier, every village a fortress, every forest an ambush point. You don't fight the enemy army, you make it impossible for the enemy army to even exist in your country. So let's actually do the mathematics of military greatness. Alexander the Great, Hannibal, Napoleon, Genghis Khan. We are going to put Chen Hongdao next to every name on that list and ask one question. Who was facing longer odds against a stronger enemy with fewer resources and still won every single time they had to? This brings us to the final analysis, the big one. How does he really stack up against the certified legends of military history? This is where the debate gets really, really interesting. Okay, let's start the argument. You take Alexander the Great. I mean, an undeniable genius, right? Undefeated, conquered most of the known world. A clear case for the greatest. But the counter-argument is that his Macedonian phalanx was a revolutionary military technology. He always had a superior, better organized force. He never had to face an enemy that was fundamentally stronger than he was, which is what Chen Hongdao did every single time. Okay, what about Hannibal? The Battle of Cannae is legendary, a masterpiece of tactics. But he won the battles and lost the war. Napoleon? A tactical wizard, no doubt, but he ended in defeat. His record isn't perfect. Even Genghis Khan himself always fought from a position of military superiority. Chen Hongdao, on the other hand, faced a 20-to-1 disadvantage against the world's #1 military power and went 3 for 3. It's a record without any parallel.
But his legacy isn't just some historical footnote. It's an idea that echoed down through the centuries and directly shaped the 20th century in a huge way.
Here is the uncomfortable truth that this document forces us to confront. 700 years after Chen Hongdao wrote his military principles, a general named Giap used those exact principles to defeat the most powerful military force of the 20th century. The same ideas, the same logic, the same conclusion. Which means the question is not whether Chen Hongdao was history's greatest commander. The question is, why did it take the rest of the world so long to figure out what he already knew in 1285? This is a direct quote from General Giap, the architect of the victories against both the French and the Americans. He explicitly states the connection. We learned from Chen Hongdao. The fundamental principle is the same. Don't defeat the enemy with their strength. Change the nature of the war so that their strength becomes useless. I mean, wow, that is a 700-year-old idea directly influencing modern history? Which leaves us with a final thought experiment. If Tran Hungdao and Napoleon met on a battlefield, who wins? And this isn't a trivia question, it's a genuine strategic puzzle. Because the answer forces you to decide what military greatness actually is. Is it the ability to win a perfect battle, or is it the ability to win an impossible war?